So the astronauts who are on station now don't take showers. For 6 months, there's no showers.
Pardon me?
They don't take a
Are
shower.
they getting vacuum cleaned or something?
The good, the bad, and the science. Television, movies, comedians, and scientists. The good, the bad, and the science.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Science, the show that breaks down the science of television and movies with a comedian and a scientist. Today, we're discussing Red Planet. So we're talking all things Mars and Val Kilmer and Carrie-Anne Moss and Tom Sizemore. It's going to be a blast. I'm Ethan Enberg, your host, and I've got two wonderful guests joining me today. My first guest is an astronomer and volunteer Wikimedian from Chile. Welcome to the show, Carla Toro.
Thank you. Hi to all of you, and thank you, Ethan. It's good to put a face to the voice because I was listening to the podcast, so it's
Great.
good to see you, all of them.
I'm glad you listened to it. I hope my face doesn't disappoint you. I should have turned my camera off. So
We're good.
You're reporting to us live from Chile, which is very exciting to me, and you also host a podcast. Is that correct?
Yes, I host the podcast of Wikimedia Chile, so you can. We're in Spotify, so you can check that.
Only on Spotify?
Spotify, Deezer, and SoundCloud, I think. Apple Podcasts, of course.
Of course.
Apple Podcasts.
Come on, shout out. No, that's very cool. I'm very excited to talk to you, but I got to introduce our next guest. Is that cool?
It's cool. It's cool.
Okay, thank God. Didn't want to offend you. Our next guest is the Senior Program Director in Space Production at the International Space Station U.S. National Laboratory. Good afternoon and welcome to the show, Dr. Ken Savin.
Hi, Ethan. Thanks for having me. Hi, Carla.
Good afternoon to you both. I should say you're both on different times than I am, but yeah, I'm glad that you have joined me. I'm glad that you watched this movie. I'm really curious to know what you guys thought about it. Red Planet. Carla, have you seen this before?
Yes, I saw the movie. I have to say, it's not a good one. I think Ken will say.
Okay, not a classic?
It's not my first choice about a movie about the Red Planet. So I will think that it was a good movie. But every time I was looking at the movie, I thought like, girl, that's not how it works. That's not how science works. So I think Ken would say anything else.
Yeah, was that interrupting your enjoyment of the movie, Ken, the science aspects of it, or?
I thought it was really entertaining.
Okay, here we go.
But But Carla's right. It has some technical errors. Interpretations of science that are a little odd.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to agree, and I'm no scientist. But even just writing down some of my notes, I was like, do I sound stupid, or are they making me feel stupid for writing this? I'm not sure. But I also wanted to mention, I did a little bit of research after watching the movie, not on science, of course, but I realized that there was a lot of tension on this set, apparently. Val Kilmer and Tom Sizemore were friends and then had a falling out because of this movie, which I thought was really funny. So apparently Kilmer became enraged when he discovered that production had paid for Tom Sizemore's exercise machine to be shipped to the set. So Kilmer apparently is reported as shouting, "I'm making 10 million on this, you're only making 2." To which Sizemore responded by throwing a 50-pound weight at Val Kilmer. The two refused to speak to each other or even come onto the set if the other one was present, which necessitated the use of body doubles when shooting scenes involving both actors.
Wow.
So, yeah, I'm sure that did not help things while they filmed Red Planet.
No, I have to say that when I was looking at the movie, and I also afterwards, I Googled it, and the first thing that happened and the first thing that popped up was like, this movie was a total disaster.
Yeah, I think it lost like $50 million, which is no joke, and came out like 20 years ago. So I don't know. That's probably a little bit more now. But anyway, the whole thing starts out with this VO kind of explaining the situation that we find ourselves in as the human race in 2025, which is only 4 years from now. So that was my first question off the bat is, do you guys think we're in a similar situation than what they're saying? Are we looking to terraform Mars because we've ruined Earth?
Yeah, I think we've only got about 4 years left.
That's
Okay.
it. That's it.
No, I do think we're in a serious situation. I think we're starting to understand that we are changing our environment, changing the climate of this planet, and the extent to which, for example, plastics are a challenge for life on this world is extremely serious. So, and the reality is we're not fully addressing it. So in that way, I think the movie is making a statement, and and maybe the timing is off, but if we continue to head down the path that we're heading in, we're going to start to see significant changes to the way we have to live our lives because of what we've done to this planet. Now, your question about are we going to try to go terraform another world? First of all, if Mars is the solution, then we've got real issues, because you're better off just trying to go to Antarctica and make a life for yourself, year round out there, because it's probably warmer there, and at least you can breathe the air, right? Whereas you go to Mars, a minus 70-degree night is not unusual, and there's no oxygen, outright to be breathing, and the atmosphere is much lower than ours. So it is a desolate, frozen desert. That Mars, that sort of sums it up. So I don't see that as being a solution, but as we get into talking about the movie, they had to take some artistic leaps to allow for something to be reasonable. We can talk about, what that looks like, but that's my feeling. I don't know. Carla, what do you think?
No, I think that what you say, it sums up everything. But I wanted to say that nowadays, when we talk about environment and all of the things that we have to do to change that thing, all of the climate change, we have to talk about the paywalls behind the scientific articles, and that's why I came from the side of Wikipedia, Wikimedia, etc. Because one of the things that we need to do to change and to, I don't know how to say it, but like combat the climate crisis is with data, but the data is behind paywalls. But now Wikipedia, and well, Wikipedia as a project, but Wikimedia is a place that the information is not behind paywalls, so you can access the information there. So I think that, first of all, when we talk about the climate crisis and everything, we have to talk about the paywalls behind the scientific articles, because we don't have we can access the information to change all of the things that are happening now. So I think that when we talk about going to Mars, it's like, I don't know, maybe we can change things here first.
That would be nice. I don't know if you guys have this problem in Chile the way we have here, but people being able to get accurate information from a trustworthy source is kind of the king issue, I would say.
Yeah.
So even if it is free or on the news, or, it's just a mess. People have no clue. It seems to me, at least, they don't know where to turn.
You're absolutely right, and it's
Thank you.
easy to go and check out and find misinformation than to find the facts. But another thing is the thing that you said. I mean, the people cannot how to say it. It's like they can.
Dígame en español. No problem.
Oh, great! Vaya. Dale. No, but people cannot think or understand if that information is misinformation or is a fact.
Right.
They can differentiate the two things.
I agree. Ken, why haven't you and all your buddies in the scientific community joined up and made a news program or a news channel or something where everyone involved from the ground up is all scientists and it's all proven factual information? I feel like the journalists don't have PhDs for the most part, and so we can't trust them. There, you want ratings?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that come into play. So I'm not going to downplay the issues with misinformation and people for political or financial reasons taking a stand that is counter to what we know to be true. But I think there's also a piece of this where the science is not always clear cut. It makes it really difficult for a layperson to be able to make an informed decision or come to an understanding. I think that's a key part of it. I would go even further and say that in a lot of cases, the problems that we're talking about here, these challenges, are very big. They're global in scale, and they are epic in the time frame that we are talking about. These are problems that in many cases our children and their children will be the ones that are going to be living and have to address. And we're only beginning to go at it. So I think that is also very difficult for people in general to understand, to see that, hey, it's just a bag that I got from the grocery store, because I got a couple of them, and what's the big deal? But you have to look at the vast scale this is happening on, and the fact that it's happening again and again. And plastic and other things like combustion engines are impactful because you have a fire in your fireplace, you're going to put CO2 into the atmosphere. But that CO2 that you got from burning wood was going to end up in the atmosphere anyway. And it would happen in the next 100, 200, 300 years, just because microbes are going to break the wood down and make CO2. That's one carbon cycle that is standard. But fuels brought out of, oil or gas or coal, those are carbon sources that have been locked up for tens, hundreds of millions of years, and would have stayed locked up for another 100 million years until we dug it out and we found a way to vaporize it all. So these are the types of things, they're big picture things. So I understand, Carla's absolutely right. It's hard for people to understand, and there's a lot of counter to science commentary going on. But at the same time, even the things that do make scientific sense are really tough to grasp.
Well, I think that's why it's important that it really is on not only the consumer, but big corporations to kind of take the lead and make huge changes that will impact all of us without our say, essentially. But before we get into this super dread, awful conversation, I do have some fun questions about this movie. And I'd love those answered. Because, or at least your opinion on them, if we don't have an answer. One of them comes in this intro VO section where she's just describing the people that are coming on this mission. And at one point, she says that one character is, quote, a hothead, but a good co-pilot. And for some reason, in my mind, I was like, would they let a hothead co-pilot a spaceship? I feel like that adjective means they wouldn't get selected.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
It's
good.
the first mission to Mars.
Here's good. Okay, so we have to step back 20 some odd years to when the movie was made, and if you looked at the people who were a part of the U.S. space program, even the Russian cosmonaut program, these people were generally military. And most likely people who were from the Air Corps, whether it be Air Force or Marines or what have you. And those people are high performer, high achiever, and it's sort of built into them that they are the best. They have to be. That's how you have to think. And and if you look at what's happened with the U.S. space program over the last 2 decades, there are still pilots, and I will tell you that I know some of them personally. They are not hotheads. They are great people. I'll talk a little bit more about astronauts in a second. But what you see is they're starting to shift to people who are molecular biologists and physicists, and even in a discussion I had with some people from SpaceX, talking about, hey, how are you going to do training for these astronauts? Da, da, da. And they said, training. Astronauts, no, we're going to hire farmers. We're going to get farmers. They're going to be the first people to go to Mars because they're the people who they can solve problems. They know how to grow their own food. My quick answer to you is no. You're not going to get a hothead for a 14-month mission, right? But you do see that things have changed. And one of the, I think, significant things from the movie was that they had the commander is a woman,
right?
Which is not only very, I think, logical and realistic in today's world, but from the U.S. Artemis mission to put a person on the moon, the next person to step on the moon, the first next person to step on the moon, be a woman, is my bet. I think that is the plan. So
great. So the movie did get something right. That's nice to know.
It got something right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I love that. I assumed you want somebody co-piloting who is the opposite of a cool head who is going to be able to remain calm, solve problems. So I was like, right off the bat, like, what the hell is going on here? And then the other one that I really have to dig into is Amy, the autonomous mapping, exploration, and evasion machine, creature, villain, like the only evil villain of this movie for some reason.
But it was a badass.
Sure.
Amy was a badass.
Yeah.
Amy was a badass.
Yeah.
It just seemed like she was an unnecessary badass, I guess. To be like, she was supposed to be there to help them, and yet you knew, right, the first time that we saw her, and she was like the good, like they were trying to portray her as like a dog, a loyal dog on the ship. It was like, this thing looks friggin' bad news.
I thought the producer said to the cast, like, we need a villain.
Yeah.
Who can be that
We don't
person?
even need a good reason
Amy.
for them to be a villain. It can just be like, something went out of whack, and now she's in military mode. And that was my main
Military
question:
mode.
is why would they have something that has two modes, navigation mode and military mode?
Well, it was on loan from the Marine Corps. The Marines were kind enough to ship it over, and
But doesn't that seem like a really dangerous decision? To have it essentially go into a mode that will kill all the people on the ship.
bad decision.
That was a bad decision.
So I think something that we do need to understand is that for any mission like going to Mars or going back to the moon, we are going to be dependent upon technology that we've developed, which could be used for good or bad purposes, right? And at the same time, we are already dependent upon some robotic devices on station, and we're exploring new ones. And whether you look at something like the rovers that have been sent by the Chinese and the EU and the US and Russia to Mars and to the moon, those were very basic in design and but it's in some ways they were extremely sophisticated. They are the pinnacle of technology of their time, and even today, some of them, Curiosity has been rolling around on Mars for 8-10 years. It's a miraculous piece of hardware. So we are going to be reliant, and I think there's something to be said from the movie that you have to consider that. How are you going to use it? How could things go wrong? And with the same time understanding that we will not be able to do it without. That's just what it's going to come down to. And
Right.
I think Amy was, why would you do it? They said they needed a device that would allow them to find their way. There's no GPS system on Mars, and at the same time, I think there were probably much better approaches. That just seems to be the one that would sell the most tickets, right? So
Unfortunately, it did not.
It did not. Unfortunately, it did not.
It did not.
Yeah, and by the way, asterisk, military mode and guerrilla tactic military mode.
Yes.
Like, it wasn't just, it could have easily killed all of those people as soon as it felt threatened. And instead it goes into guerrilla tactic mode where it just breaks one of their ribs and then scurries off. and then just kind of waits around, I don't know doing what, until it can pick off one by one to like mess with their heads. I don't know.
Yeah, and that part when the other guys were looking at what Amy was looking.
Yeah, she's like showing
Was like,
off.
what? Yeah. Why?
I really have no clue. I mean, Ken, do you guys design stuff in order to just... No? You're shaking your
No,
head.
but they do have a set of robots on station right now in a little project called Astrobee, and it's a bunch of these little softball or so sized balls that float around, and they've got little CO2 cartridges for propellant, and people on the ground can fly them around. You can like program it to go do something and move around, and it's really a STEM education tool. So, although it doesn't have a practical purpose at this point, it's a training device which helps us understand how we'll be able to use systems like this in the future. It's a way to get young people engaged, right? The three of us aren't going to be the ones who are going to go walk on Mars, but our kids or their kids will be the ones who either walk on Mars or enable that.
I doubt it'll be my kids, but that's a nice thought.
Yeah. I think, you look at some of the other devices that have been developed, like the robotic arm that Canada built for the shuttle, and there's a Canada arm on the space station now. Those are extremely important parts of the whole program, the whole system that allow it to happen. So can I see something like someday an Amy being created or something similar? Perhaps. And getting things, I've heard that if you build devices that are closer to something we're familiar with, it makes it easier to interact with them. So that might be a reason why it would look like a dog or a person or what have you. But a lot of movies have gone down that dark and dangerous path and with bad consequences. So I don't know, they did it because they wanted it for the artistic purposes, but I believe there will be things like that. Maybe more like a little rover that goes with you and carries your stuff, but there'll be things like that to help us. Yeah.
That's very cool. Another question here, and this is perfect because you work with the International Space Station. How likely is it that someone walks in on someone else in the shower?
Yes. I had the same question.
How normal is that?
Okay, so I'm gonna. So I can't get. There's some details I know that I can't share specifically. But
okay,
what I will say is, we have to understand that these people are living in a different situation. So just take the recent launch on SpaceX of the 4 amateur astronauts, right? And they orbited for 4 days, which is quite an achievement, I think.
Yeah.
Halfway through the mission, the toilet failed. So they had to resort to the old, there's a backup, right? There has to be a backup. And if you look back at the Apollo missions, you can see what the backup was. So the Apollo missions were all men. So they had a device that they could urinate into. It was a tube and it had a little adapter at the end. So you sort of plug in and do your business. But if you had to go number 2, if you had to, had a bowel movement, you had to go to the bathroom into a bag. Okay. Mm-hmm. And keep in mind that the space that they were in on this SpaceX, this recent Dragon mission, was probably only about the size of the compartment of a Volkswagen Bug. So all 4 of them are in there.
Oh my Lord. And for 4 days?
For 4 days, and you've got to go take a bowel movement. I mean, there's nowhere to go. You're right there.
Oh my God.
So now let's take a look at what's happening on space station. They are living with each other for 6 months at a time. So they really get to know each other. Sure. And I think there is a kind of camaraderie and understanding between them. And many times they're military or they've been trained, but there's a little desensitization to that. Now, are you going to walk in on Carrie-Anne Moss, coming out of the shower? Probably not. And there is separation, and they have their own quarters, and even from the NASA side, after work hours, which is like 5 or 6 o'clock their time, all the cameras are turned off, and they have it's sort of personal time. You have to be willing to be a little bit closer to people than maybe you would be otherwise, and that's part of their training, and part of what's going to be, I think, the mental piece of us doing really long missions, and why space station is such a good model for that, such a good place to try these things out.
I mean, first of all, I love that pretty much no matter what I ask, you're taking a defensive stance of like, this is kind of normal. Like, this makes sense, Ethan. So I love that. And secondly, I just felt like it was completely inappropriate. And that there were like no locks, which is a really, I don't know, to me, elementary thing. If you were going to take a shower, that no one can just, I mean, the doors were like automatic. It was like, and the doors open.
Yeah,
but
that's it. Yeah, so I don't think it's going to be like that. You know, but I think there's another piece of it. If we look back at the SpaceX approach, which they're sending farmers, you know, they may send families, right, or husband and wife teams where it doesn't matter in that way. Yeah. I will say one other thing, just because. So the astronauts who are on station now don't take showers. For 6 months, there's no showers.
Pardon me?
They don't take a shower.
Are they getting vacuum cleaned or something?
Well, so what they use washcloths. They wash themselves off with washcloths. There is not a shower per se.
Soapy washcloths?
Yeah, they can use some detergent, and their hair, they actually use a shampoo that requires no water. It's a rinseless shampoo.
Dry shampoo.
A dry shampoo, yeah, and that's been known to work. And
you're telling me they're clean?
I am. I'm not sure I would say.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I would say that exactly. You know, they wear the same clothing for a couple of days at a time. You'd go through too much clothing, and there's no real way to wash it on station. So, so you're used to a different set of smells too, I think, when you're on station.
I never considered that. I've never seen that in the movies either.
No, they don't talk about some of these things. They don't talk about, they're not dirty secrets. They're kind of the practical nature of human beings in space. In fact, I remember talking to a guy from NASA who said going to Mars would be easy if we didn't have to send people.
Sure.
That's the problem, is keeping these people alive and keeping them clean and healthy. And
so, I mean, I will say, Dr. Zaven, dirty secrets sounds like the exact perfect terminology to describe. I know you said it's not that, but it is. These people are dirty. Yeah. They're going number 2 in bags. I don't know. It just feels like these are dirty secrets.
So the toilet system on station, even when it works properly, it's very sophisticated, but it is. You know, it's actually Soviet in design. The Russians, back during the time of the Soviet, designed it, and that same system is used on the Russian side of the station and on the U.S. side. And it's not perfect, but it works. And that's what you're going to come down to, is how do you build systems that can keep the human systems alive? Okay.
This is my last, hopefully, we're going to get into a bunch of science stuff, I promise all of you. But this, I have to ask about hopefully my last really dumb question. There's a scene where they're making moonshine on the spaceship. They've like taken over some lab, and now they're using it to concoct alcohol, heavy percentage alcohol, it seems. So would that be allowed? How did you feel about that?
On the U.S. side, they're U.S. government employees on the job, no alcohol. There's no alcohol. Now, the Russians,
here we go.
They have alcohol. They bring alcohol up there, and sometimes, I've been told, the U.S. Astronauts will go over and meet with
have a drink?
and consort with their Russian colleagues. But I don't see somebody making moonshine on station. But if we're going to go to Mars and somebody wants a beer, I think we're gonna head down that path. Now, I will say before I mess up on that, you won't drink beer on the way to Mars. You'll drink beer when you get to Mars. Drinking beer on the way there, like having a beer on the space station, it's bad, very bad. Any carbonated beverage. During the shuttle era, Coca-Cola and Pepsi had a competition to try to build the best can of soda and then provide it to the astronauts, and it met with disaster. disastrous consequences. Yeah.
You're making it sound like people were killed because of this.
No,
What do
it
you
wasn't
mean
that bad.
disastrous?
But just imagine, just in your mind, picture that when you drink like a soda, and there's some gas involved, you burp, and the gas comes out.
Okay.
And that the reason is because the liquid is heavier than the gas. So the liquid's at the bottom, the gas comes to the top, and out it comes. In microgravity on the space station, that is not the case. Everything is a jumble. So when the gas is evolved and you burp, the gas isn't necessarily the first thing that comes out. Could be everything else in your stomach.
You're telling me that Coke and Pepsi,
they learned that the hard way.
they were basically forcing people to like barf burp.
They were, yeah, that's what happened. They learned a tough lesson. So beer's not going to be, they're not going to drink beers, but they do have vodka from the restaurant side. And we did have a project from Budweiser on the space station where that Budweiser kind of claimed, hey, we want to be the first company to brew beer on Mars. That was their big sale to us. And what they did was they developed an experiment to look at growing barley in microgravity, which is actually a very interesting experiment since barley and other grasses are significant to the food chain, and growing food in microgravity you learn a lot from it, whether you're using it to support your mission to Mars or just understand how barley grows. It's an interesting experiment. So.
Okay.
And it's a bold move.
It was a bold move, yeah. The funny thing is, their little experiment, they was in a container that looked like a large beer can. It was classic.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, hey, speaking of, that was another one of my questions. Apparently, Amy is powered by, quote, a helium nuclear power cell the size of a beer can, which can help her run for 8 months, and I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah, so there are some nuclear devices that you can use to generate electricity. And if you look at some rovers that have been sent out by the U.S. and other countries, they've used nuclear cells. So that technology exists. There are challenges with it. To be honest, there's serious challenges. But for some things, that's what you're going to have to do, especially as you start to move away from the sun and solar is no longer an option. You're going to have to come up with another mode. And nuclear is, long term, and as long as it's kept sealed and away from the people, it's generally going to be a really effective way to generate power.
Yeah, but I have a question there, because here Amy is powered by that hydrogen cell, but they're going to Mars. It's not that far away from the sun, and the Curiosity rovers they have like solar panels. So
yeah, so it could work. Yeah, so yeah, okay, but you can imagine that it might be tough for Amy to wander around with a big solar cell. It wouldn't make for good cinematography if she was slow and had a big fin on her back, right? So
yeah, we need her running around like a wolf.
That's right. So you're bringing up a great point, though, Carla.
There was a quote that the religious guy on the ship, who I got to be honest, don't know why he was there. He said at some point that no one ever tested the ship properly. He was like, oh, you guys got to have faith because you're on this ship that no one's ever tested properly going to Mars. And I immediately wrote that down like, I'm sure there's ample testing that you guys do before. No? You're telling me no?
Well, I mean, everything, you're putting the space station up there. So here's an interesting point about the space station. So the space station was not built by the United States. It was built by the Russians and a whole bunch of European countries, the Canadians, the Japanese. So all these parts, they were assembled for the first time in space. They had never seen these big pieces, had never seen each other before until they were connected. Think about that. And they were being put together by people who had nothing to do with their production. And they're doing it in microgravity. A bunch of astronauts or a bunch of hothead space jocks, right? That's a lot of the technology and the things that we do, even looking at space shuttle, they were fantastic concept, vehicles. They were built and there was nothing else like them. All their parts had to be made specifically for those vehicles. Same with space station. Much of the space station is built specifically for that application. And yeah, there's a generation of evolved components that led to that point. We knew that this would work, but some of the components had never been fully tested, and we learned things when they were put in space. A great example is going back to the bathrooms. For some reason, I love that topic.
Oh, you're obsessed with it.
I know, I'm obsessed with it. The urine recycler. So they recycle all the water on station. So urine, sweat,
Like Water
all
World.
the water. And then, so the joke is that what you drink today as coffee is what you're going to be drinking again tomorrow. Okay? So
Yummy.
they built this device that is a marvel of technological advancement that allows them to take all these different liquids, water based, purify them, and then return them to the water supply for the astronauts to use. And they tested that unit on the ground, I think in Alabama is where it was developed, for months. Over a year they had tested this thing. They had guys drinking coffee all day and peeing into it and drinking this stuff coming out, and it was great. Water was great. They put it on the space station, and it failed within a month.
Whoa.
Yeah. So what it did was they couldn't figure it out, had to bring it down, take it apart, bring it down, and look at it, and they took it all apart, which you can imagine what that must have been like. And what they found was it was totally clogged with calcium and phosphorus salts, calcium sulfate and phosphates. And
Why was that getting in there in space and not on the ground?
That's a good question. It's because the astronauts lose so much bone mass.
Oh my God.
Because their bones and their muscles, they're wasting away because they aren't being worked upon by gravity, and it was all ending up in their urine and then in the water supply.
They're peeing out their bones.
They are. So they had to, they do at least 2 hours of exercise a day on these contraptions they've got up there, and they take supplements. But it makes you think about the fact if you're going to send people to Mars and they're going to be losing all their bone mass for 14 months, you won't be able to take that one small step. You won't be able to walk.
Lord.
But that's the great thing of science. We
That's
learn
right.
through
That's right.
experience.
I guess and check in space.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really scary. Okay, sorry, I just can't get over peeing bones. So we got to talk, speaking of scary, about the fire. There's a huge fire that happens on the space station or the spaceship. And I mean, the first thing that occurred to me was like, this station would not survive. How would such a huge fire be put out and nothing? It seems like everything ended up being all right. She first uses an extinguisher, which launches her into a wall. The computer makes fun of her for it. I did actually enjoy that aspect of the movie, that the computer had an attitude. At one point, she tells her there's a fire, and Carrie-Anne Moss says, like, that's not good. And the computer goes, no, it isn't. Which I love the sass. But anyway, she uses an extinguisher. She gets some of it out. The computer basically tells her, you can't do this anymore. There's too much fire. You're not going to be able to stop all this fire. She like latches herself onto a wall and then opens like a big window. And then all the fire just gets sucked out into space. And then for the most part, everything's cool. So is that an accurate series of events?
I don't know if that's an accurate thing. I mean, Ken can talk more about it, but from my side, with my little experience in space science,
You're saying no go.
no, I think I thought it was a great move. I think you open that doors, there's no air.
You suffocate it.
Yeah, it's extinguished. So I was like, yeah, that's a great move.
Okay.
Great move.
Yeah. So first of all, fire behaves differently in microgravity, and at the point when she's in this problem, they have lost their centrifugal force. However, they're generating artificial gravity. So, and what you see is interesting on the ground. recognize that fire works by air coming underneath and then being pushed, pulled up because the warmer air rises, and so you constantly have air running through it. Well, in microgravity, if you light a candle, instead of looking like a yellow and then orange and red and with smoke coming off the top fire, it's just a blue ball. Wow. And it suffocates itself after a few moments because the only thing bringing new air in, it's not being pulled in, it's just diffusion, and it starts to produce so much CO2 that it suffocates itself. Larger fires, though, especially fires that are running in a certain direction, let's say you have a piece of conduit, like a metal tube, and you fill it with vaporized kerosene and air, oxygen or air, and you light it at one end, it will run down the pipe. And they've did experiments. There's a group at the Glenn Research Facility in Cleveland, part of NASA's organization, that did studies on this to try to understand it, because they wanted to make sure that Carrie-Anne wouldn't die. This is, or future Carrie-Anne Mosses wouldn't die. Now, there was an example of a very serious fire in space, and it was on Mir, one of the Russian the Russian station, and a U.S. astronaut was there. He was a guest with 2 cosmonauts.
So he was drinking.
No, well, he may have been, but at this particular time, he was not.
Okay.
But they have a series of devices for emergency air production. If the air supply fails, it's a chemical reaction that produces oxygen, and as a byproduct. And it is a perfect solution, because if you really need oxygen and you turn this thing on, it will work. It will not only work, but you cannot turn it off, which is, if you need oxygen, you don't want it to fail. You want it to work. Mm-hmm. They're not sure what happened in this particular case, but they think that when that device, which is a cylinder filled with a very active chemical agent, was being filled up in the Soviet Union at the time, the person who was filling it got part of their rubber glove in the material.
Oh my God.
And when they went to open the valve, it caught fire. And like I told you, once you turn this thing on, you are not turning it off. So it's a very active chemical agent that produces oxygen, and now it's on fire. And the U.S. astronaut said it was like a very big blowtorch blowing hot fire and material across the area it was in. Now,
oh my Lord.
They thought about abandoning ship. The problem was they had to get by this fire to abandon ship. Couldn't. So they went and got extinguishers. They put on face masks and their air breathers, and they fought the fire with CO2 fire extinguishers, like we saw Carrie-Anne Moss doing. And they were finally able to do it. They put out the fire. But one of the most telling things I remember was one of the cosmonauts said he had a burning desire to open a window. That was his, right? Same thing, but if you're not wearing a spacesuit, that's a very bad idea.
So yeah, if you guys are listening out there and you're in space and there's a fire and you're not in a spacesuit, don't open the window.
Don't open the window. So
good advice. So
it is something that needs to be considered. I would say it's something that we've had to consider since the beginning of any ship faring, right? Whether you're on a regular ship out at sea, a wooden ship, or a submarine, these are all things that we have to consider. And the space, part of the National Lab and the International Space Station and NASA's exploratory effort is to look at these challenges. How do we overcome this? If this happens, how do we save the mission and allow us to continue on successfully, crew and everything?
I wanted to talk about something, but mostly ask you, Kenneth. But when I was looking at the movie, when I was watching, I thought about the mental health about the astronauts, because they were like 6 months in space, and I wanted to ask you about that thing, because I saw an article on Wikipedia about the mental health about astronauts, and I was like, maybe I can come to the source and ask directly to Ken.
Yeah, so mental health is a serious challenge for people being held for a long period of time away from their families. And even in the movie, there was a scene where one of the guys, one of the astronauts who gets killed off, he says he looked back and he didn't see the Earth today. He said he expected it. He expected at some point he wouldn't be able to see the Earth, but it still shocked him. And I think there is something to be said for that. There's something, the astronauts on the space station can look down and see the Earth. They're right there. They're 250 miles away. But as you start to move away from it, you do lose something. There's something about seeing the Earth, and even with the Apollo astronauts, seeing the Earth rise. So a lot of effort has been put into understanding mental health. How do you pick the right team so they can work together and be a comfort to one another? What are the activities you can give them? Like, can they grow a garden, a little garden of vegetables, and maybe have some of those built into their diet? That's very significant. How do you connect them to their families or people back at home, especially when, if you're on Mars, Carrie-Anne Moss mentioned the fact that she sent a message and she'd have to wait 20 some odd minutes to get a response. So you're not having a dynamic conversation with people at some point. But on space station, they have movie night, and they'll watch Red Planet, and all make fun of each other, and stuff like that. They'll have certain special foods. They have birthdays and birthday cake. And I've been told that after a birthday, they spend literally weeks of time pulling particles of birthday cake out of the air filters.
God.
Right? So, but I think all of those things are leading up to us understanding how we will live when we step out into space. Things as simple as what underwear feels comfortable to you. And that's actually something the astronauts get a big say in. They get to pick for their underwear, or they can go out and buy their underwear, because how comfortable they feel in a piece of, jockey shorts that they've worn for 3 straight days is part of their overall well-being.
Yeah. That makes sense. I have so many more questions and we're running low on time, but I maybe thought we could end on a hopeful note, an optimistic note, because at the core, this movie is about living on another planet and, spreading our civilization in this on Mars, of course. But so they say that they have sent probes with algae to Mars, and that they started growing. It turns out there's also these nematodes, someone calls them, that are making oxygen. So are we working on anything like that? Do you see that in our future, whether it's the moon or Mars or somewhere else?
As part of that terraforming effort,
Yeah.
I can see, there's been a lot of talk of, could we grow crops on Mars? And it turns out they've done analyses of the Martian soil. They don't call it dirt, they call it regolith. That's the technical term. And there are problems with it. It will have to be chemically modified to grow Earth crops on Mars. And not to mention the fact that it will have to be done in a little dome, and the radiation also has to be dealt with, all these other things. But in thinking about that and all these modifications and things they had to work through, what it really starts to tell me is that they are doing comparisons back to Earth. They're thinking about the Earth and our situation in the environment, and that perhaps the greatest impact to us is not the fact that we will someday go to Mars and build colonies on Mars. I have no doubt that that will happen. It is the things we learn about ourselves, the things we learn about our own world and the way things work, and the technology that we develop that will not only impact our ability to get to Mars and live there, but will impact us here on Earth, that are the greatest benefits that we will get from these exploration missions. And it's a hard thing for people to see, going back to some of our early conversation around seeing the bigger long-term picture, because everybody's like, oh, it costs $2 billion a year to operate the space station. And that's, money could be spent doing other things. but we learn so much about our planet and about science in a general sense and about ourselves that it's actually a great deal, just a great investment in ourselves as people. Not to mention the fact that we are at a very significant time in human history where we, the three of us and everybody who's paying any attention, are seeing humanity take its first real steps. The Apollo missions were fantastic achievements, and they were, I mean, you can't talk about it enough, but they were one-offs and they're done. There was no then whats. We're now at a point where the then whats are starting to happen, and they aren't happening as a US-centric event. They are worldwide. This is humanity taking its first real steps out into space, and we are getting to see that and benefit from that. So in that way, I am extremely enthusiastic about it and excited and feel really proud and I think optimistic about our future as a people.
Well, that's awesome. It's exactly what I wanted to hear because I think we're doomed. So
You think you're doomed? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I'm more about. No, I have faith. I have faith.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, you're both way smarter
Talk
than
to us,
me.
Carla.
So the fact that you guys have faith and are optimistic, that's great news. I think the more I learn about the climate, the more doomed we are. But so,
No.
yeah, Carla, what do you think? And also tell people where they can find you and listen to this podcast you were telling me about.
Everything that we are talking about today and all of the science that we are talking about today, you can look it up in Wikipedia. I'm like I always say that I'm Wikipedia smart. Yeah, because I read a lot and I'm an editor of Wikipedia. But you can go and look up at any article about science in English Wikipedia, and it's very good and it's great. And all of the Wikipedia, especially in English, but in all of the language, they are reliable in science. And you can, I don't know, like talk about this, and you can watch a lot of things that we say about this, a lot of things that we say about this myth about Wikipedia. But just to summarize everything that we are talking about, if you know how to write and you have an internet connection, you can edit Wikipedia. And here I'm inviting you all to put your knowledge in Wikipedia. But first of all, or I don't know, like to summarize. You can go to any of the social media about the Wikimedia Foundation. I'm from Chile, so you can go and look it up for Wikimedia Chile. We are a small country, but we're good. And I host the podcast about Wikimedia Chile. It's called the Wiki Cafe.
Oh,
like a wiki coffee.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you can go and check it out in Spotify, Deezer, Apple Podcasts, etc.
Okay, love it. Well, everybody check out the Wiki Cafe, get a cappuccino. That sounds delightful to me. Thank you, Carla, for watching this movie and joining me on the show. Dr. Savin, anything you want to tell people about?
Well, if people want to talk to me about doing work, science in space, you can reach me through the International Space Station National Lab, or you can send me an email or LinkedIn or what have you. And, we talked initially about the environment and, and whether we're doomed or not. And we actually today, it should be launched on our website. You should be able to go there, but we just launched a challenge for people to come up with science to be done in space that will help us understand the environment or find solutions for environmental challenges. And there's money to do this research. So you wouldn't have to come with your money, just come with the idea and we'll help set up an experiment, and you can get your experiment run in space to try to help save the planet.
I love that. I have a bunch of ideas already. So,
But they are scientific accurate?
Yeah.
they're just suggestions, I guess. Like, what if we just had no car Fridays? Throwing it out there. No one can use a car on the planet on Fridays. No good?
Yeah.
You don't even have to go to space to enact that. You can just say it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a few of those last year, didn't we?
Yeah, that's true. We had no car year.
And it worked. It worked. The air was really clear for a while
It
there.
started working, didn't it?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you guys both seriously so much. It was an absolute delight to talk to you today, and I hope we speak again for some other really silly Martian movie.
Thanks, Ethan. Bye, Carla.
Thank you. Bye, Kenneth. Bye, Ethan.